Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Konrad Gorlinski and this is the news. Over 200 attempts to illegally cross the Polish-Belarusian border. That's today's tally. Among many other places in the vicinity of the village of Cheremcha, there was a group of about 100 people trying to force through the Polish border post. Today, all attempts have been prevented. One illegal migrant was detained. He was an Iraqi citizen. The border guard issued 31 decisions to deport from the territory of Poland.
Niestety próby siłowego wdarcia się.
Unfortunately, attempts to break into Poland by force did take place. The most numerous were here in the vicinity of Cheremcha. There were about 100 migrants who tried to get through today. They were driven by Belarusian trucks to the Polish-Belarusian border here. Even a footbridge was prepared for them, which was thrown over the fence so as to lower it as much as possible. Those trying to cross the border illegally are also behaving very aggressively. They throw stones, logs, have tools for cutting wire, with the support of Belarusians who blind the Polish services with flashlights and lasers. In the vicinity of our facility in Mielnik, there, in turn, a dozen or so migrants tried to force their way into Poland, and this attempt was also thwarted, but it was carried out in a similar pattern, and they were aggressive foreigners who threw stones at the Polish services. As a result of these events, a military vehicle was damaged. Yesterday, the Polish Minister of National Defense, Mariusz Błaszczak, asked on air by RMF-FM about the current situation at the border crossing in Kuźnica, pointed out that the tough stance on the part of Poland is bringing results. He stressed that there is still a risk of aggressive provocations. Undoubtedly, the fact that the Polish policemen and soldiers on Tuesday in Kuźnica Białostocka prevented the attack that was then carried out on the Polish border from being successful, and thus they defended the Polish border, meant that Lukashenko has a problem today. This is making Lukashenko look for other hybrid attack possibilities. The inhabitants of Podlasie shared their opinions with us about the situation at the border. I think everyone is equal. We're all one. So there shouldn't be any borders? No, there can be borders.
To nie powinniśmy pilnować naszej?
The borders have to have limits. I feel sorry for these people. Thankfully, I heard that some of them have been flown back home, and I think that's how it should be. I think they should fight for their own countries. I mean, not to come here like cowards, sorry, and hide here really, but fight for things to be better in their own countries. I support our officers. I'm against Lukashenko. They are innocent people. This is Lukashenko's doing, that he's starving them and calls on them like dogs. The bill for the construction of a wall on the Polish-Belarusian border was signed by President Andrzej Duda 3 weeks ago. The wall is to be 180 kilometers long and 5.5 meters high. The construction is scheduled to be completed by the middle of next year. Lithuania and Latvia also have plans to build permanent security measures on their borders with Belarus. And Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki visited Estonia and Lithuania this afternoon for bilateral discussions about the border crisis with his counterparts in the Baltic states. He traveled to Latvia later on in the day. Morawiecki said in Lithuania that he was receiving information that the difficult situation in Afghanistan after the Taliban took over the country in August may be used as the next stage of the migration crisis. Poland accused Belarus of continuing to ferry migrants to its border, despite clearing camps close to the frontier earlier this week, as Polish Premier Mateusz Morawiecki toured Baltic states to seek support in the crisis. We know of diplomatic and official contacts of Belarus and Russia with Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. And there probably will be an attempt to use the crisis in Afghanistan as the next stage of the migration crisis. And the migration crisis is just one part of the great political crisis in which Lukashenko, with his real principle, and I think nobody has doubts that this is President Putin, will continue such actions. I think the things that unfolded before our eyes, these dramatic events, may only be a prelude to something much worse, he added. Poland and Lithuania called for continued support from the European Union and NATO. For us, it's very important that any talks with Belarus are coordinated with Lithuania, Poland, and Latvia, which are at the forefront of the hybrid attack, and no decisions are taken which do not solve the situation fundamentally. Lithuania is one of our closest partners, and we are friends. Therefore, we trust that what Lithuania does is in the most appropriate interest of the Lithuanian state, and we support Lithuania in all its endeavors, including this one. There had been 208 attempts by migrants to force their way into Poland from Belarus on Saturday, the border guard said. A few more than on Friday, but well below the 501 attempts recorded on Wednesday. Neighboring Lithuania said 44 migrants were prevented from entering on Saturday, the lowest number in a week. A video shared on social media showed fireworks going off in Rotterdam last night as violent protests against COVID-19 restrictions continued for a second night across the country. 5 police officers were injured in the Netherlands, and at least 28 people have been detained across 3 provinces. The latest unrest began on Friday night in Rotterdam, where police opened fire on a crowd that had swelled to hundreds during a protest the city's mayor said had turned into an orgy of violence. 3 people believed to be hit by police bullets remained in hospital today, a statement by the authorities said. The protests were sparked by opposition to government plans to restrict use of a national corona pass to people who have either recovered from COVID-19 or have been vaccinated, excluding those with a negative test result. The Netherlands reimposed some lockdown measures on its 17.5 million population last weekend for an initial 3 weeks in an effort to slow a resurgence of the virus. But daily infections have remained at their highest levels since the start of the pandemic. Youths were also angered by a New Year's Eve firework ban to avoid added pressure on hospitals that have already been forced to scale back care due to a surge in COVID-19 patients. Finally, El Salvador plans to build the world's first Bitcoin city. Funded initially by Bitcoin-backed bonds, President Nayib Bukele said at a conference this afternoon, doubling down on his bet to harness the cryptocurrency to fuel investment in the Central American country. Speaking at an event closing a week-long promotion of Bitcoin in El Salvador, Bukele said the city planned in the eastern region of La Union would get geothermal power from a volcano and not levy any taxes, except for a 10% value-added tax.
The only tax that you're going to have in Bitcoin City is the value-added tax, which, normal value-added tax, 10%, which you would pay for, if you buy a Coke, you pay 10%. And that value-added tax will be used, half of it, to pay the bonds that we're going to issue to build up the city, so it's going to pay for itself. And the other half will be transferred to municipalities, so they clean up their trash, they keep the parks nice, and they keep the city all neat and clean.
Bukele estimated that the public infrastructure would cost around 300,000 Bitcoin. El Salvador in September became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. Although Bukele is a popular president, opinion polls show Salvadorians are skeptical about his love of Bitcoin, and its bumpy introduction has fueled protests against the government. Likening his plan to cities founded by Alexander the Great, Bukele said Bitcoin City would be circular with an airport, residential and commercial areas, and feature a central plaza designed to look like a Bitcoin symbol from the air. El Salvador planned to issue the initial bonds in 2022, Bukele said, suggesting it would be in 60 days' time. Samson Mao, chief strategy officer of blockchain technology provider Blockstream, told the gathering that the first 10-year issue, known as the Volcano Bond, would be worth $1 billion, backed by Bitcoin and carrying a coupon of 6.5%. Half of the sum would go to buying Bitcoin on the market, he said. Other bonds would follow. After a 5-year lockup, El Salvador would start selling some of the Bitcoin used to fund the bond to give investors an additional coupon, Mao said, positing that the value of the cryptocurrency would continue to rise robustly. The bond would be issued on the Liquid network, a Bitcoin sidechain network. To facilitate the process, El Salvador's government is working on a securities law, and the first license to operate an exchange would go to Bitfine. As usual, thanks for tuning in with us this evening. Please stick around for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and other programs. But from me, it's have a great week ahead.